Can we turn again now to that passage in Matthew's Gospel that we read together, and seeking the light of God's Spirit, we focus on words we find there. Matthew chapter 10. Matthew chapter 10, and we'll read again at verse 30. But the very hairs of your head are all numbered. The very hairs of your head are all numbered. Now, this chapter is one of these pivotal chapters in the Gospels. Gospel account gives us the life of Christ from his birth to his resurrection. And sometimes chapters will flow into one another, and we're just reading events, and there's no great new development. But other times there are great new developments, and this chapter is one of them. It's a staging post, in fact, in the Gospel account. And it's a staging post because at the beginning of the chapter, we saw the Lord appointing the 12 apostles. That was a momentous moment in the history of the church, as well as in the lives of these men. And it's quite interesting, and that's why I read at the end of the previous chapter, where the Lord himself says that the harvest is plenteous and the labourers are few. And he gives the answer to that dilemma. Pray that the Lord of the harvest, that he will send out labourers into his harvest. That's the answer in every generation. But you notice no sooner has he given them that instruction than he does precisely that. He sends them out as labourers into the harvest. So there is the closest of connections between the end of chapter 9 and the beginning of chapter 10. So we have the appointment of the 12. Then we have the instructions for the 12, and I'm not going to go into that just now. And then thirdly, the Lord deals with encouragements and reassurances for the 12 apostles. Now, it's no wonder that they would have needed encouragement and reassurance. Even as they're being sent out, they must have felt uncertainty and trepidation. They must have been concerned and even perhaps afraid as to what was lying ahead and how they were ever going to manage to do the work that he had set out for them. Well, the Lord was conscious of that. And in this particular section of the chapter, the Lord gives 4 reasons why these men, and indeed the church in general, should not be afraid, should not be cowed, should not be silent, but should get on with the Lord's work and live as the Lord would have them live in the midst of all the difficulties and even the hostilities that might come their way. He gives 4 reasons, at least 4, as to why they should be encouraged and reassured. The first of the 4 you'll find in verses 26 and 27. Fear not them therefore, for there is nothing covered that shall not be revealed, hidden that shall not be known. What I tell you in darkness, speak in light, and so on. What's the Lord saying then? He's saying, you press on. You press on. And you press on remembering that your enemies, be they physical or spiritual, cannot prevent your public vindication. The Lord will vindicate you. He will bring about a day when what you say is seen to be true. He will give you success in that regard. The day is coming when you will be vindicated. And the day is coming when they will be exposed. When they will be exposed. One day, what is now concealed will be revealed. Who the enemies are and what they have done, and who the righteous are and what they have done. There is a day of revelation coming. He said, you press on in the light of that, realizing that it is so. But then the second reason that he gives to encourage them is in verse 28. Fear not them which kill the body, but are not able to kill the soul. Even, he says, if the worst comes to the worst, even if you forfeit your very lives as my people, remember this, they can't kill your soul. All they can do is kill the body. And keep that focus as well before your mind. And then the third reason that he gives to reassure them is in verses 29 to 31, where he tells them that the Lord, their Father in heaven, has such care and concern for them, that whatever enemies or trouble may arise, they cannot outsmart or outdo the Lord, that he remains in control of it all. The Father's will, the Father's loving care will be at all times a constant reality. That's the third reason, and I'll return to that third one in just a minute, because our text is found in that section. But there's a fourth reason in verses 32 and 33. Those who confess me before men, I will confess before my Father in heaven, and vice versa. So you press on, remembering that the day is coming when those who have stood with me will be by my side, and those who, for whatever reason, have chosen not to, will not be at my side. Well, let's return then to that third reason, which we find in verses 29 and 31, and which includes the words of our text. And I'm going to focus very closely on the words in verse 30. The very hairs of your head are all numbered. Now you can see at glance that the Lord here is reassuring the 12. All the questions, all the fears, all the uncertainties that they might have. Remember, he said, the very hairs of your head are all numbered. Preachers, first of all, we read these words and we worship. We read these words and we worship. What else can we do but worship the Lord? Because these words in verse, they reveal to us something of the glory and the magnificence of God. They call out worship from our hearts, from our lips. All we can do as we think of these words is to bow our heads and worship him. Surely, surely it's calling for that. The very hairs of you. Well, here's intimate knowledge. Here is intimate knowledge. Here is knowledge beyond what we can readily understand. We realize as we ponder these words that we're dealing here with something that is just beyond us, isn't it? Let's reduce it down. If he would know the number of the hairs of the head of one person in this world, you might say that would be extraordinary. Just choose one person. And if the Lord could say, I know the number of hairs on that person's head, why do you say that's extra? What knowledge? But that he knows the number of those here who populate his word. That's us being extraordinary. That is extraordinary. And that he knows now, as clearly and perfectly as he did several thousand years ago, the hairs on the head of Abraham, every day that he lived, and every minute that he passed in this world. Everyone else who has ever lived. As we read these words, as we think on these things, they call us to worship. They call us to say, how great the Lord, how mighty the Lord. What a God. And remember, all of this involves no effort on his behalf. It would take huge effort for us to even get halfway to counting our own hair. What a task. It would task our eyesight. It would task our patience. Keeping track of it, it's practically impossible, you might say. It involves no effort on the Lord's part. He doesn't have to do it hair by hair, head by head. He just knows. He's always known. And he's never been wrong once in that knowledge. Not once. Now, for us, the hair are they are so insignificant. Who cares if our hair is dragged out in the pot? Never. We listen. See, notice. We often sing in the psalm, don't we? These words, that which concerneth me, the Lord will perfect me. Yes, my friend, everything will be perfected, even down to the very hairs of your head, because he is God. The magnitude of God. How great, how surpassing great he is. Don't let the things of this world blind you to the greatness of God. Don't let your familiarity with the things of God blind you to his greatness. If you learn nothing today, if you grasp nothing today, if you remember nothing today, remember this, that we are being shown here the sheer magnitude of God. He is God. He is the God of creation. He is the God of grace. He is the God and King of providence. How great thou art. In all these words, then sings my soul, my Saviour God, to thee, how great thou art. You'll never understand how great, Christian. Even in eternity, you'll always be learning how great. And every moment, not that eternity is measured in moments, every moment you will see something more of his greatness. And you will never exhaust his greatness. We read these words and we worship. As we begin a day, as we begin a week, we worship. It's to hide any thought, flippancy, or carelessness in the presence of God. Let us come and worship and bow him and go home with a sense of that in our hearts. How great he is. When we read these words and we worship, but secondly, we also read these words and we tremble. We tremble. If his knowledge is so great, what's hidden from it? Precisely knowledge. No. If he knows the very hairs of our head, then he knows the secrets of our hearts, the thoughts in our minds, the ins and outs of it all. And this is a remembrance of that and a reminder of that. Oh, this verse exalts God. It reminds us of his great glory and magnitude. But it also reminds us that he is judge, that he is the recorder of our lives and of our thoughts, the one who will open the books one day and we will stand before him. Oh, we can fool other people, we can fool ourselves as we stand before God. The very hairs of our head are numbered. There's no avoiding the issues of that day. Oh, if we are at peace with him, then what a blessing, and if we are not, what a thought. You know, we make him so small, don't we? Often we think of him and he's like ourselves, but he is not. He is not at all like himself. What a thought. Are there things in your own heart and soul that you know has not been put right between yourself and the Lord? While you say, I'll just conceal it, or I'll bury it deep. Or no matter how deep we bury it, he knows where it's buried and what's buried. Well, we read these words and we worship. We read these words and we tremble. But thirdly, we read these words and we rejoice. Oh, the Lord's people, they read these words and they rejoice. Why do they rejoice? Well, they rejoice at three things, really. They rejoice, first of all, at God's care. Their Lord says to them, the very hairs of your head are numbered. Why do we need to fret about his ability to care for us? Why do we need to question, as we so often, and as Satan would have us, can the Lord look after you in this situation and that situation? The very hairs of your head are numbered. What further evidence do you need? Need we worry about the great big problems if he concerns himself with even the smallest of details? The Lord knows. Maybe there are things you can't tell a living soul. The Lord knows. And it's not just the fact that he knows how many there are. Each one is precious to him as his children. The Christian can say that. Not only does he number the hair of your head, but these very hairs are precious to him. Everything about you is precious to him. How deep his care goes, how all-encompassing and comprehensive it is. You know, sometimes a mother will keep a lock of a child's hair. Maybe the first hair they got, and they'll put it in an envelope, and years later they'll find it. It means nothing to anybody else find it, you put it in the bin. It means something to them. Oh, the depth of the tenderness of God for his people. The enemy of your soul will say that he is a God far off and does not care. But this verse gives a lie to that. How will we manage, Lord, say the twin? Oh, my friends, the very hairs of your head are there. Such is my care. Such is the Father's care. There is not a detail, there is not an in or an out that he doesn't know. The beauty of this reassured. The Christians encouraged by God's care, but also surely by God's power. God's power. We can't do this. We can't do it for ourselves. There's so many things we can't do. We can't do it forever. We might say very much further, but our power is limited. His power is not. Though our numbers the hairs of the head, what limiting is there of that understanding? Of that knowledge? He is able to do things that are beyond us. That's what it's saying amongst other things. He is able to do things that are simply beyond us. And this verse reminds us that there's nothing beyond him. Nothing beyond him. The most impossible of impossible. God all things others. There is, of course, another side to that. There are certain things which he cannot do. He cannot deny himself and so on. But even these things are part of his reassurance. He cannot change. He cannot deny his word. Oh, friends, God's power, God's minute ordering of life, God's ordaining of circumstance. Is he able to do it? Is he able to go before you tomorrow, this week, whenever? Then he gets from you head or not. Reverend Charles Spurgeon, who was a famous 19th century minister in London. Many of you will be familiar with Mr. Spurgeon, of course. On one occasion, he was invited to go to Canada to take some special services. The priest said he was going to preach in Halifax. So he sent off, and the people who were organising his visit arranged that he would take services during the week and then on the Lord's Day and so on. But they quickly realised that such was the demand that they didn't have a building in Halifax that could cope with it. So they decided that what they would do would be to put up a temporary structure. Wasn't a building finished and furnished, just a temporary structure. It was huge. It was more than 8,000 people. Big downstairs, huge big gallery area. Well, Mr. Spurgeon arrived and began to take the services, and the weather changed, as it so often does. In Canada, it began to snow, and when it snows there, it really snows. The snow came down thick and fast. But even as it was coming down thick and fast, the temperature was up and down a wee. You know the way it is sometimes. It's thawing, you look out the window and it's thawing. Then the next thing the cars are frozen. Well, that's the sort of weather it was. Thawing and freezing. Anyway, along came the Lord's Day, and despite the weather, there was a goodly attendance for downstairs. They were up in the gallery. And during that service, just before the service began, the temperature had obviously gone up a bit. It had begun to fall. And because the building was quite a temporary structure, every stick or crack in the wooden sill and everywhere else was leaking in. Drips and drops were falling here and there. And Spurgeon himself commented, you know, he said, I wasn't best pleased about it. We were getting wet and we were getting cold and water was dripping everywhere. And he said, I remember thinking in my heart, I said, Lord, ordering these circumstances, why is there a thorn just now? We could do without this because of leaving people cold and wet and they're all distracted and we'll probably have to stop the service a week early. Anyway, I didn't think of that. They stopped. Off they went. Well, no sooner had they left the church than the temperature changed again. And a hard frost set in. And with it, a huge fall of snow. Tell you how they left the church. It's just a fall of snow, and such was the build-up of snow on the temporary roof that it collapsed. The whole building fell apart with the weight of snow. The roof brought down the galleries brought down everything else. And he said, I realized in that moment, when we were in church that morning, he said, if it had been freezing instead of thawing, that building could have come down with us inside. He was relating that to his own congregation in London when he came back. He said that the area where he was speaking, they put up some sort of temporary pulpit. It was completely flat, some beams had come down there. He said if it had been freezing instead of thawing that particular morning, your minister would not have come back home. He would have died in death. All the Lord's plan, the very hairs of your head are new. And when God's on, when I wait on times anyway, I was talking about it. God's care, God's power, God's omnipresence. You know, even if we could number the very hairs of our head, even if we could have a complete tally, let's imagine for argument's sake that you were able to do that, and you mix the number. That number would soon be wrong. Because hair falls out. It falls out unnoticed. You go to sleep at night, falls out. You go out in the window, I suppose, it falls out. We wouldn't notice. We couldn't keep track of it. Even if you had the exact number, you couldn't keep track of it for 1 hour. We're so distracted. Wouldn't notice it. He is constantly alert. We were singing in Psalm 56, He knows our tears and our sighs. Into thy bottle put my tears. Are they not in thy book? Every single one of them. He is the keeper of Israel in Psalm 121, who never sleeps nor slumbers. He's never distracted. He is always alert. And then he gives another example of that in verse 29. Are not two sparrows sold for a farthing? One of them shall not fall on the ground without your Father's knowledge. Sparrows were something of a delicacy, but they were cheap and they were very insignificant. Two of them are sold for a farthing, it tells us in verse 29. Two of them for a penny. It's interesting. When Luke mentions sparrows, he gives us slightly different figure. He says 5 are sold for 2 pence. In other words, they were so cheap, they would throw one in for free. That's how insignificant they were. Yet none of them is. Not one of them falls to the ground without the involvement and the will and the knowledge of the Lord in heaven. Not just that he knows where they fall, where they die, he ordains. And has always ordained. Apart from his sovereign care, nothing can happen even to the heirs of his people. What does he say in verse 31? Fear not, therefore. You are of more value than many sparrows. They are sold 2 for a farthing, 5 for 2 farthings. Oh, you are of more value than many sparrows. He created the sparrows. He cares for them. But they are nothing in comparison to his people. He hasn't elected any of them to everlasting life. He didn't send his son for any of them. He hasn't saved them. He hasn't adopted them. He hasn't given them great and precious promises. You are of more value than many sparrows, than all the sparrows, all of everything. Such are the value he puts on his people. He speaks about his care, though they are sold for 2 farthings. What then of the redeemed? It's not 2 farthings, everybody. It's not silver and gold, but the precious blood of Christ that redeems them. That's their price. That's their value. Their new value. Christ in his sight. And back to that psalm I mentioned earlier, surely that which concerneth me, the Lord will perfect me. Yes, your concerns of body and soul are all in his safekeeping. If you are in his safe, if you are reconciled to him, all of this belongs to you. If you are adopted into his family, you claim this. Oh, God has a general watchfulness over all his people. We see that even in these verses. But we are being taught here that he has a special providential care for his people. And he approves of that with these remarkable words. The very hairs of your head are all numbered. We read these words and we worship. And we tremble. And we rejoice with thankfulness. If he is our God and our Redeemer, may God bless his word to our hearts. Let us pray.